It's Sunday morning, and we are protecting military families as we do on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk, with the owner of Brochu Law, Chris Brochu. Chris, how are we doing this morning?
Good morning, Casey. I'm doing great. I'm excited to chat with you today. We've got a number of interesting things related to Camp Lejeune. I know that everybody is kind of trying to sort out who all may have a claim, how they apply, what illnesses, what are the damages, right? There are so many different questions. This law is in its infancy, although we know that Camp Lejeune poison water has been an issue for decades. I mean, going back to 1953. We're going to cover it all today this morning. And if you have any questions along the way, especially ones that you think some of our military listeners might have, I'd love for you to jump in and ask, because these are a lot of really interesting it's an interesting statute because we have so many people that apply: spouses, children, civilians, veterans. I mean, it's very complex and comprehensive. So I'm excited to talk to you about it. I'm excited to tell our listeners about it because of the fact that it probably applies to so many of them.
Absolutely. We touched on it a couple weeks ago, but we will pick up that conversation right here. But as we always do to start the show, Chris wants to tell you about the second opinion that he has at Brochu Law. It's important. If you think you are a military family and may need a second opinion on something, Chris is the guy to contact, and this is what he does for you.
Two things related to the second opinion. The first is, if you have a life insurance case, whether it's a state policy or federal policy, you submit a death certificate and a beneficiary claim form, and you don't have a check for that policy from your loved one's insurance company within 30 days, that's a red flag. You need to contact an attorney. The second thing is, if you have a military benefits question or a question about your legal rights, and you either are getting the runaround, you have been told by the VA or potentially your VSO that, hey, these are the, all the benefits you're entitled to, and you want to just, get a second opinion on that, give us a call. Our consultation's free. We're happy to speak with you. We're happy to give you, an idea of what you can do if there's another avenue you can go. We're happy to speak with you if you're leaving money on the table. And if we decide to work together, we would enter into a contingency fee agreement. There's no fee unless you win, and our firm advances all costs on behalf of military families and consumers. So if you have a question, feel free to reach out. It's case, C-A-S-E, at brochulaw.com. Brochu is spelled Bravo, Romeo, Oscar, Charlie, Hotel, Umbrella. There's no R or E on the end of that. It's like brochure without the R and E. Brochu, though.
It's a good way.
Easy enough, right?
Easy enough. Or give them a call, 904-201-1771. And while you're on the website, by the way, check out a video version of the show. Thanks to our guy Justin at Nova Productions. You can see me and Chris sitting here having the conversation. All right, Chris, let's get into it. Camp Lejeune. Let's just start with the basics. Where is it? What is it, for the people that may not know about it? Kind of fill them in before we get into like the big details of this case.
Sure. Camp Lejeune is in the state of North Carolina. It's on the coastline. It's very close to ironically, the city of Jacksonville, North Carolina. So it's a base where, from my understanding, the clients that I've had discussions with, when you get out of boot camp at Parris Island as a Marine, the first stop, at least during this time period, was Camp Lejeune. That's from what I've been told from my clients that served there in the 70s and early 80s. I'd love to hear if you know anything else about Camp Lejeune and you want to chat with me about it, you want to talk about the things they told you about the water, the types of service members that were there. There's really sad. There's an attorney that kind of spearheaded this litigation, and during a call that I was on, he talked about all of the children's cemeteries that were there. If you know anything about this, if you know how they instructed people to dump jet fuel, back by the woods, if you know anything, give us a call. We want to hear your story. If you have an illness, we want to hear it. We're trying to compile as much evidence as possible to show the connection and link the dots between service period and illnesses.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something Chris is working on, and he has a lot of clients that he's working with. So if you can help that, obviously he wants to help you by helping everybody. But let's talk about the water, and that's what this is, right? This is the main thing around this is the water, for lack of a better term, wasn't good.
Not only wasn't good, it was toxic, and the government knew it and didn't tell anyone for a long time. And there was an attorney from South Carolina, his name's Ed Bell, credit to him. He fought hard and got a lot of information about this. And what ended up happening is he convinced a group of congressmen and women that this was an important issue, because it is. And that's how we ended up with the section within the Honoring Our Pact Act, and a lot of you have heard me talk about that before. It covers a lot of the burn pit stuff, and we talked about that on previous episodes. But when we talk about Honoring Our Pact Act today, we're talking about the portion that covers the Camp Lejeune toxic water. And again, the toxic water is a result of jet fuel, these underground tanks that were leaking into the water supply, and the children and the spouses and the civilian workers and the veterans were consuming this. I mean, the reports that I've read, they're talking about, okay, if it was the summertime in North Carolina and you were on a training exercise, how many liters of water would you consume?
What? You
start to think and process the contaminants and the things in this water that people are consuming. Staggering amounts. And the stories that I've heard, I mean, the people that have called me, children, spouses, veterans, about the types of illnesses and injuries. Have you ever heard of a family that's all had the same type of lower back surgery? And without a connecting, they weren't in a rollover accident, right? They didn't fall getting out of the bathtub and rupture their L2, L3. They were just living, and they had a back surgery in their mid-30s.
Doesn't happen.
No.
So when you talk about, obviously the first thing you think of is like the drinking water, but this is everything, right? I mean, this is like shower water, and this is there's no clean water is basically what it was.
My understanding is it would be any water that was consumed on that property from those well sites or from that source. And that would cover anybody that served there from 1953 to 1987.
That is a massive window.
They think that around 1 million people in total, conservatively, would have been drinking the water. And again, to have a claim, it wasn't you stopped in, headed to Florida from New York, and you stopped in for a weekend to see your brother and drank some water. You would have had to have been consuming the water for at least 30 days to potentially qualify. But
interesting.
Yeah, there are. I mean, this statute even covers children in utero. So if you were a child and your mom was pregnant and you hadn't been born yet, you'd still be potentially covered by this.
Is that still, I know this is all new, so you might not have this exact information, but is that still a 30, like if you were pregnant for 30 days? Like, do you know how that works?
I think as long as your mother was carrying you and you were a child in utero in general, and you suffered, like, one of the main effects that they talked about was heart conditions in young children. Like, one of my clients was born with a heart murmur, which is not, I mean, again, that may be isolated. If you look at the country as a whole, there would be these types of illnesses kind of all over, scattered throughout. But when you have a large concentration of people that have the same exact condition, especially over decades, that's the pattern that we're looking at.
Absolutely. 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk, protecting military families and talking about an important topic this week. We did it a couple weeks ago. We'll continue on the Camp Lejeune water situation. Chris, for somebody who might not know, what happened to this camp? Like, it's no longer a thing. They shut it down. How did that play out?
I'm not entirely sure about the history of when they shut down certain well sites and transitioned to others, or made the water environmentally friendly or cleaned it up. I'm not entirely sure, and I think that will become more readily available with time. Again, I know that there are some attorneys out there that have gotten the FOIA requests and done more research. But primarily it was years and years and years of these pollutants and toxins getting into the drinking water and people consuming them, the benzenes and the different types of carcinogenic toxins that are known to cause these cancers. And I would like to give a list of some of these cancers. I know that I've given lists before. I mean, last week you heard me give an extensive list about for-profit schools. I don't say this to bore you, and I certainly don't say it to take up airtime. Our airtime is precious. But I think that sometimes if you hear something, especially an illness or something that you know your relative has, that might tip you off, because what we're encountering here, folks, is we've got an entire generation of people that don't know why they have a neurological disorder. They don't know why their bones are weak. They don't know why they have cancer. They don't know why they have leukemia. They don't know why they were born without a limb. And it was based in some instances on the fact that when they were a child, they were drinking this toxic water and they maybe just never knew about it, right? They never talked to their parents. So we're just trying to spread the word. If you fall into one of these health categories, think back, ask your relatives, especially if they were in the military, where'd you serve? When'd you serve? What types of bases were we at when we were young? And some of those cancers and illnesses, folks, include myeloid leukemia, bladder cancer, brain cancer, breast cancer, central nervous system cancer, cervical cancer, esophageal cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma, kidney cancer, leukemia, liver cancer, lung cancer, myelodysplastic syndrome. And my apologies, I never made it that far in my science education to pronounce some of these. Multiple myeloma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer, rectal cancer, and some of the other serious diseases and illnesses that have been recognized include cardiac defect, epilepsy, fatty liver disease, female infertility, kidney damage, immune disorders, nerve damage, miscarriage, myeloplastic syndromes, neurobehavioral effects, Parkinson's, renal toxicity, and scleroderma. There are many others that could potentially fall into these categories or even fall into other categories. And what we're screening for, particularly me and the firms that I work with on these moving forward into the future, is we're trying to piece together and link the time periods and the illnesses to see if there's a pattern. And one of the ones that's not on this list, but it's fairly evident based off of the amount of calls and clients that we screen, is there seems to be bone weakness, and meaning, deteriorating or degenerative diseases that are occurring at a much, much younger and earlier stage than they should be. Mm-hmm. And some of these instances, there's not even a genetic link to these types of things. Meaning you have no history in your family of these, and all of a sudden the child
happens. Yeah. Absolutely. 104.5 WOKV Jacksonville's News and Talk on a Sunday morning. Chris, we've talked a little bit about it, but I guess I hope you understand what I'm asking you here, because I'm not even sure how I'm going to formulate it yet. But you have these clients that come to you, and you just talked about it. There's people all over the United States that need this help. What are we building towards? Is this like a class action that we're coming into? What is the end goal for compensation for people that you guys are working to do?
So I do litigate class actions. The Camp Lejeune are not class actions. Those are not the types of cases that I will be handling if we're moving forward with these. It would be what's called or commonly referred to a mass tort, which means every individual files their own action, and you may have a number of clients that have all of these different types of claims. So I'll just distinguish it quickly just for our listeners. A class action is we have something in common, meaning Casey and I both were part of the same bank and they charged us an unlawful fee, and we have that in common. What's different here is that Camp Lejeune, you have one service member that has bladder cancer, you have another one with multiple myeloma.
Different things.
Right. They have different common issues related to their illnesses, and they both may have claims, but that's how you would just file two different actions. But importantly, no matter where you live, anywhere around the world, you could still file a claim, and all of these claims, all roads lead back to Camp Lejeune. And we've talked about in other districts, right? We talked about in the Sweet versus Cardona case, why did that end up in Northern District? Well, in this particular federal statute, we're in the Eastern District in North Carolina, which is exactly where Camp Lejeune's located.
Interesting. Okay, so what are the damages that somebody could receive from this? Like, is there something, I mean, obviously, if you now have cancer because of this, I don't really think any amount of money or anything is going to make up for that. But what can these families get, I guess, for what they've been through these last few years?
Great question. When you think about damages, you really need to think about justice. And I say that because the only type of justice that you receive in a civil case typically is money, right? Justice in a civil case equals money because we can't put anyone behind bars in a civil case. That's for the courts and the prosecutor's office and Department of Justice and all of those agencies. In a civil case like this one, justice equals money, and damages are based off of your illnesses and your harm. And I think it depends on the type of cancer that you have. Did your loved one pass away? If they did pass away, you'd have a claim under a wrongful death statute. That cancer would differ from someone that was living with leukemia for the last 10 years and will likely live with leukemia for the remainder of their life. That also may differ from the child that was born with a heart murmur, which that child will be different from the child that was born without an arm or without a leg, and so on and so forth. And I think the damages component comes down to a couple of things. The first is, what are the medical bills, right? First and foremost, in any civil case, especially ones where it involves injury, what are the medical bills? Have they had multiple procedures? Has this caused the, veteran, spouse, child, what types of therapy or physical therapy or surgeries or surgical intervention have they received? Then you look at sort of the economic and non-economic harm. Has this limited their ability to find a career? Has this limited their ability to, do they have any lost wages? Has it limited their ability to find the love of their life or to continue a relationship with the love of their life? Those are the things, early stages, that you're looking at. This case doesn't allow punitive damages. This type of federal statute under the Camp Lejeune Honoring Our Pact Act, this portion does not allow punitive damages. So you would be filing basically for those economic and non-economic damages. And again, they vary. And again, if you want to think about what a potential claim would look like, think about your medical bills, think about your lost wages, think about the pain and suffering that you've gone through, right? If you've lived on an IV drip dealing with leukemia for 10 years, or you've been going to chemotherapy, those are all factors that would be at issue.
Take off your lawyer hat for a second, because I want to ask you your opinion on something.
Shoot.
Do you think the government has done enough to reimburse, for lack of a better term, these families that have struggled with this?
Well, they haven't done anything yet. So sitting
Fair.
here today, no.
Right.
But are they on the right path?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
You believe so?
And the main reason is, I think that with a lot of these types of claims, we know that we know that these are not isolated incidents. We know that this is a generation of Marine families that have dealt with these issues. And I think that this is the first time that this government cover-up, which is what it was, right? They said I think it was the 70s, that the water had extra minerals in it, but it was good to drink, it was safe to drink. Those were all lies. But I think now with the Honoring Our Pact Act in 2022, it's the government finally giving justice, or giving the ability to fight for justice to those military families, which I do think is in a step in the right direction. And again, I'm not here slamming the government. They got a difficult job. The only thing I'm asking them to do is to take responsibility.
Sure.
And if they mess up, make it right. I think that by passing the Honoring Our Pact Act, we are moving in that right direction. I think that until those families are rightfully compensated, justice has not been done.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Real quick, before we hit our first break, give the folks some of those awful illnesses that people have been dealing with, but maybe if you have one of these and you can relate and think, hey, I might have a case here, go ahead and give some of those illnesses that people might be able to relate to.
Any type of cancer, give us a call if you have a question about that. Any type of cancer. There are so many on this list. If you've got one, it may qualify. Any type of Hodgkin's lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma, and then some of the other, sort of serious diseases that are on this list: cardiac defect, epilepsy, fatty liver disease, female infertility, kidney damage, immune disorders, nerve damage, miscarriages, neurobehavioral effects, Parkinson's, renal toxicity, scleroderma. There are many others that may apply. Again, those are things, if they're not on any of the lists that we named, but you know that you and your family were at Camp Lejeune and you all have illnesses or diseases that you're suffering with, or your loved one has died from, give us a call. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what you know. And let's see if there's a doctor out there that could associate these toxins in the poison drinking water to that type of disease. Because ultimately, those are the experts, right? They're the ones that can say, okay, this disease, this illness is directly related to this, drinking this days, weeks, months, years.
Yeah, absolutely. So he said give him a call if you think you might need his help. That number is 904-201-1771, or send him an email, case@brochulaw.com. We got more to do on the other side of the break. Stick with us, protecting military families on a Sunday morning. 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We'll be right back. Welcome back on a Sunday morning. 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk, protecting military families with Chris Brochu. If you missed any of the first half hour of the show, WOKV.com to get the audio or get a video version of the show. Thanks to our guy Justin with Nova Productions. You can find it on Chris's website, brochulaw.com. And while you're there, find out more about Chris, and if you need his help, case@brochulaw.com. Give him a call, 904-201-1771, especially if you've gotten some information, you've gotten some health news, anything that you think, I'd like to maybe have a second opinion on that. If you want a second opinion on anything, Chris can help you with that. He's built the Brochu Law Second Opinion. And Chris, what is that exactly?
If you have a life insurance issue where you have submitted a death certificate and a beneficiary claim form, and you don't receive basically the policy proceeds in the form of a check from your loved one's insurance company, life insurance company, within 30 days, you should call an attorney immediately. The other thing is, if you're a military family and you've got a question about your legal rights or military benefits, we offer a free consultation. That's our second opinion for us to take a look through, figure out if the denial was proper and if there's something more that you're leaving on the table. Figure out if the VA or your VSO got it right. Let's say you're at 30% and they tell you that's the most you'll ever get. If you have a question about it, give us a call. You got a question about your lending documents, a consumer issue, an injury issue, a military life insurance issue, anything. Camp Lejeune is what we're talking about today. But if you have a question about any of your legal rights or benefits, please give us a call. We're happy to speak with you. If we do decide to work together, if there's something that we realize, either a legal right or a military benefit that you are leaving on the table, we decide to work together, what we'll do is we'll execute a contingent fee agreement, and there's no fee unless you win, and we advance all costs on behalf of military families and consumers.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it, Camp Lejeune is what we're talking about. And I have a question about that in terms of how this is going to be handled at the government level. But before we do that, obviously, when we've talked about this in the first segment, we talked about the water and the illnesses that have come from it. Go ahead and give the people some of those illnesses that you've heard of or that you've seen or that you know of that are being reported out of this toxic water.
Sure, Casey. And the biggest thing to remember is that we provided that Camp Lejeune roadmap. So if you served there from 1953 to 1987, those would be the years. You had to have been drinking water there for at least 30 days. This would be available, this private right of action would be available to veterans, their spouses, their children, even children in utero, and any civilian workers that were drinking that toxic water from 1953 to 1987. Casey hit the nail on the head. There are so many illnesses out there that we can't possibly cover all of them, but what I will tell you is that if you have a cancer, brain, breast, kidney, bladder, liver, lung, you name it, ovarian, prostate, rectal cancer, anything that we haven't mentioned, and you have a question about it, give us a call if you served or were drinking the water during that time period. The other illnesses and diseases also include multiple myeloma, leukemia, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then the other serious diseases include cardiac defect, epilepsy, fatty liver disease, female infertility, kidney damage, immune disorders, nerve damage, miscarriages, neurological or neurobehavioral effects, Parkinson's, renal toxicity, and scleroderma. There are others out there, and we're going to talk about some of the ones that I've actually seen. Obviously, I'm going to keep the service members and families' names confidential. That's the utmost importance, but I would just like to share what some of the ones that I've seen on our list.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that as we go along. But Chris, this kind of popped in my head during the break. You just mentioned all of those different illnesses. You mentioned now this is quick math, so I could be wrong, not a math major. You mentioned a 34-year window, I think, pretty close, with a lot of illnesses resulting from it. So there's going to be a lot of cases about this stuff. How will the government handle that? Like that's going to be a heck of a workload.
It is, and I think 1 million families.
Wow.
1 million people
right.
conservatively may have a claim that we're drinking this toxic water. And here's how we know that the government likely knows who those individuals are. I have a client that called me, and he served in the military. He was at Camp Lejeune. His dad was a Marine there. He was there with his family. And he was a young kid. I think he was there from the late 70s, early 80s till he was about 3 years old. He's got some... He's got his own story. But when he was in the military years later, they sent him this packet, this informational packet, that asked him a number of questions. And that's how we know if he was there at 3 years old and he doesn't remember it, but they knew where to find him, where to send the packet. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they have an idea about who was there. And I think the conservative number of 1 million people is a number that they've estimated. And to answer your question, I don't know how I don't know how they're going to deal. If you are a assistant United States attorney in the Eastern District of North Carolina, and you heard about this federal statute, your amount of cases would certainly increase. I think they would have to bring in some extra attorneys at a DC office or something to. I mean, we're talking about potentially 1 million claims.
Yeah. And I mean, you told me in the break that you were recently on a call with like 300 plus people, attorneys, that I won't say all have clients in this because I don't know exactly, but are all invested in this. So if there's 300 plus attorneys that potentially have clients, I mean, that validates your million people, obviously. But I mean, I don't know how long it takes to like validate a case, if you will, but it feels like this could be years and years and years before you're getting any compensation for what you've been through for who knows how long.
The call that I was on was simply the call about what types of history and claims may qualify, who may qualify, a bit about, you know, that. And the attorneys on there only represent people, right? So they're only people that represent Camp Lejeune, families and spouses and children and veterans and civilians, and sort of just talking about what's going to happen once this, you know, is fully moving forward, meaning we've got all of these claims. And to understand how it will move forward, you have to understand what happens when you file a claim against the government. And in these particular cases, and we've seen this before with, you know, an example would be, say, the 9/11 Victim Fund. Congress sets aside a certain amount of money. In this case, I don't know if they've set aside a certain amount of money. I don't believe that they have. Another example would be the Stay-Skull Act. Rich Stay-Skull, he was the service member or veteran behind the act that kind of allowed for veterans and service members. Well, actually, I think Rich Stay-Skull his act was the one that was the carve out to the Ferez Doctrine. So basically, Ferez is from the Vietnam era. It says you can't sue the government for medical malpractice. And Rich Stay-Skull's act basically said that you could, so long as it wasn't wartime. So if you were, you know, if you were in a normal hospital setting and they somehow misdiagnosed you or did something improper, I believe they have a carve out for that. So it'll be interesting to see how the government, what they do with the claims. You've got to understand that different levels of claims also. I was talking to a couple attorneys that I know that I'm working with these cases that have represented service members and veterans against the government. There are different levels, similar to insurance companies, where the monetary threshold has to go up the chain. So if you had a case that was worth $50,000, maybe the attorney on the other side could or had the power to settle that case. But if you had a case worth $1 million in value, that might have to go to the United States attorney for that district. Well, what if it was above that? Well, those are the thresholds that we're talking about.
How much does it differ from like a situation where, like, if I sued you, like, how much more complicated is it to sue the government versus suing another person?
Well, if you sued me,
I'd probably lose.
Well, no. Yeah, probably, because we don't have a controversy. But
right.
But if you were in state court in the state of Florida, you know, I would have 20 days to respond. If we were in federal court, I'd have 21 days to respond, and the lawsuit would kick off. Right, be that quick. As long as I should say 20 days from the date of service in state court, 21 days from the date of service in federal court. So the date that I was actually served, right, in our hypothetical lawsuit. When you sue the government, the procedure is you've got to notify them of the claim, and there are specific claim forms. So in this case, I believe the claim form, and usually when you sue the federal government, it's under the Federal Tort Claims Act, you know, the acronym's FTCA. The government gets 6 months to respond. In these cases, I believe they're going to have a similar type of claim form, but the form will go to the Navy. And once you've done that sort of first procedural step by giving them the opportunity to respond, once you receive the denial, if it is not, settled at that stage, now you can file a lawsuit in federal court. The jurisdiction that they have identified is the Eastern District of North Carolina. And there are several divisions, right?
Sure.
We'll use the Middle District of Florida, for instance. The Middle District of Florida has 5 divisions. Jacksonville has a division. It's right here downtown. It's that courthouse that looks like a USB. Beautiful inside, absolutely beautiful. But we also have other divisions. We've got Fort Myers, Tampa, Orlando, Ocala has a division. Well, same thing in Eastern District of North Carolina. They've got other divisions up there as well. Those are going to be the federal courts within the Eastern District that are handling these cases.
Interesting. I don't know if there's even really an explainer to this one, but why does a regular person only get 20 or 21 days versus the government gets months?
Well, I think that in a lawsuit like the hypothetical one that you and I are talking about, we've got a private civil suit where we're able to go against each other and hire our own private attorneys and do all of that. Whereas the government, we've got to give them enough time, right? They are not a person, they are an agency. They're a body of our society that they're not it's got to work its way up the chain, and we've got to give them enough time to develop a proper response, or at least give them enough time to have a response.
I got you. Okay. 104.5 WOKV Jacksonville's News and Talk on a Sunday morning, protecting military families with Chris Brochu and talking about Camp Lejeune. Chris, when these families go to hire a lawyer, maybe you, maybe anybody, I guess two parts, take whichever part you want first. I know how it works with you, right? No fee unless we win and all that. But for a broader term, how do these families pay for law help? And on the flip side of that, is this still a scenario where you can help clients in Florida, or is this one of these cases that you can help people in any state? Because I know sometimes you can when it deals with like the VA, I believe, but sometimes you can't.
Yeah, I've litigated cases in New York, in federal court, New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, California, Florida, and I've got several others that if they hadn't settled would have gone to other states. I've got others right now that likely will go in other states, and there are a few ways to do it, right? So I'm licensed to practice law in the state of Florida and all of our federal district courts here in Florida. What that means is any of my clients where litigation arises in Florida, I can file a lawsuit and we move forward. When I've got cases outside of the state of Florida, there are state and federal laws that will allow me to, as long as the court grants me permission, work with local counsel to be able to bring my case. So when I get a client that says, hey, Chris, I really need your help, but I'm in Austin, Texas. I've been sued in a lawsuit there. Well, I can still represent them. I just have to get permission from the court and find a lawyer that's licensed in that Texas federal court. So for these cases, it's going to be no different. I've got a ton of clients that have called me, and up until the bill was, it had passed the House in March, and then the Senate passed it in June 2022, and then there was sort of a debacle because there was an issue of it couldn't arise out of the House because there was a financial component. But I've had sort of this waiting list of clients that I've assisted with other types of cases that said, hey, if this ever goes forward, I want you to screen us. That's what I'm doing. And what I'll do is I work with other attorneys on these, because these are very, very complex and sort of robust, the amount of discovery and FOIA requests. And just imagine the inner workings of your client has private medical records and military medical records and military service records and personnel records. So we've got a team of us, me and a couple other firms that I work with. And then any of the cases that we end up filing, we'll have local counsel in North Carolina. But very similar to what we already do. It doesn't, and again, all of it is approved by the court if they allow us to practice there, if we're not licensed there. But it doesn't increase the fee of our clients. So if our fee, gets us a third or 20% or 25% or 40%, depending on the case, our fee, no matter if we had one lawyer or 100, is still the same. We're just splitting it. Instead of one or two attorneys, we're splitting it.
Sure.
More
how
ways.
many you have. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Tell me about what happens right now if somebody listening to this show calls you up, 904-201-1771, says, hey, I heard the show. I have something that I think could be part of the Camp Lejeune lawsuit and all of that. How are you currently handling that when somebody calls you?
The first thing to know is that if you think you have a Camp Lejeune case, you need to call an attorney immediately, whether it's me or somebody else, just to figure out if you're in that time period, what types of illnesses, because you need enough time to investigate, and obviously time is of the essence. And just know, at least for my firm, we don't charge anything to military families up front. So we're not going to say, all right, Casey, give me 10 grand for a retainer. We don't do that. If we screen your case and we decide this isn't something we can assist with, you don't owe us anything. If we take your case and litigate it and we don't get you anything, you don't owe us anything. The only way that we get paid is if you get paid. And if we decide to work together, we would sign a contingent fee agreement, no money down up front. We would litigate the case. We would advance all costs. Again, the only way we get those costs back and that we get paid for our fees is if we win, is if you win, right? And what we're doing when we get these Camp Lejeune cases is we've got an ongoing list even before this was signed into law, right? Before it was passed by the Senate. And again, obviously, we've got sort of those components. The president still needs to sign it, but it's looking like there's a path to allow our military families a path to justice, or at least get them to the starting line. But we've got a list of clients. We've got a list of their ongoing illnesses. And I mean, the illnesses that they've got, a lot of them are common. Some of them are very, very staggering. I mean, thyroid disease, hysterectomy, different types of heart conditions, different types of bone weakness, very unique stuff, stuff that would obviously have to be researched and figured out because they don't necessarily fit squarely into some of these presumptive conditions. But that's kind of the starting point. And once we get you on the list and we figure out, okay, when did you serve? What are your illnesses or diseases? Kind of connect the dots to who we've already screened, then we can figure out if this is something we can work together on.
Absolutely. A couple minutes to go here on 104.5 WOKV Jacksonville's News and Talk on this Sunday, protecting military families. But you talked about it a little bit there. If you can, obviously, I know you can't give people's information out, and I'm not asking you to, but you've screened a decent amount of people. You've probably heard some horrible things people are going through. Is there anything that really stands out in your mind that you were just like, this is not right? I know all of it's not right, but is there anything that really just stands out to you?
The one thing that certainly does stand out to me is the amount of I've got usually when I get a call, it's from a family member, and then they have, their entire family that may be interested. So I've got sort of the medical history, and the part that is really staggering to me or surprising is that the illnesses and diseases are similar, and they're not necessarily genetic, and they're not necessarily related to an accident. They just happen. For instance, you've got these surgeries that take place or these diseases that surface in somebody's 30s that are not common. And sure, if it was just one person out of a family or one person out of a state, it would be different. But for everybody to suffer from the same type of disease or illness, I think it's unusual. A lot of them relate to bone weakness. A lot of them relate to thyroid, IBS, Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease, I've seen some of those, but those are related to other types of GI type issues. But yeah, just the cardiac, and there are so many different diseases and illnesses that relate. And then you hear the stories of the parents and the children, and I don't know, it's bizarre how similar they are, especially considering that most people don't know anybody in their family that had a back surgery in their 30s or 40s, and you have an entire family that all did.
Yeah.
Seems bizarre.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy that all of this has come from jet fuel, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Toxins in the water supply, and I mean, whether it was intentional, meaning they're instructing people to dump it out, or whether they have these underground containers that are leaking into the environment, those are questions that will that the government will have to answer. But it's something severe was poison in the water there, and what it is, I think we're going to find out throughout this litigation.
It's wild. Just for a little anecdote, the only way I can relate to this, obviously, is I used to work at an airport, and if they even like let jet fuel, like if it touched your skin, you had to do like a emergency bath type thing. So that's how serious this stuff is. And then if it turns out people were drinking it, then obviously that's a massive problem. So, Chris, before we get out of here, give the people a way to contact you, to get in contact with you if they might need your help with this or really anything else.
The best way to reach me is case@brochulaw.com. From there, we'll give you a call at a time that's convenient for you. We'll figure out if there's a VA disability appeal we can help with, a Military Lending Act issue, Camp Lejeune, any sort of military life insurance under service member group life insurance or veterans group life insurance, TSGLI, whatever question you have. And even if you have a question about a consumer case or an injury case, please let us know. And again, feel free to reach out, case@brochulaw.com or 904-201-1771.
And while you're on Chris's website, go ahead and check out a video version of this show, thanks to our guy Justin at Nova Productions hooking us up with that information. That'll do it for this week right here on 104.5 WOKV. Go check out a video version of the show, watch or listen back to the show on WOKV.com, and we will do it again next week. Chris, thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks, Casey. Have a great weekend.